Welcome to the Center for Simplified Strategic Planning's webinar, Innovate to Dominate. I'm Denise Harrison, Executive Vice President at the Center for Simplified Strategic Planning. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them into your chat box and they will be answered either during the webinar or in the Q&A afterwards. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Robert Bradford, CEO of the Center for Simplified Strategic Planning. Robert has led over 1,000 strategic planning meetings in a wide variety of industries with amazing results. In the last 10 years, Robert's corporate clients increased their net profits by over $50 billion. His real-world experience and innovative strategic thinking combine to give us a unique view of strategy, unlike any other. If you listen closely, I'm sure you will leave today's webinar with a nugget that will change the way you think about your business. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Robert Bradford.
Thank you very much, Denise, and welcome, everyone. I would like to reiterate what you said about typing your questions into the chat box. I would love to take questions from people, or if anyone has any observations, I will be happy to incorporate them into the presentation as we go along. Just before we get started, I want to talk to you about why I'm a person that you want to listen to about innovation. Obviously, the $50 billion in profit usually stands out for people. I've also coached a couple of people who've done very well and ended up on the Forbes 400 list of the richest people in America. I've done over 1,000 plans, blah, 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 lots of credibility there. What you're not going to get today is a bunch of poems, fluff, or nonsense. I'm going to talk to you about some things that have worked, and specifically, rather than give you a bunch of fluff about innovation and why it's important, because I think you all probably understand that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the techniques that you can use to improve innovation, especially in your strategy process. So that being said, I'm going to go through 3 tools with you. The first tool I want to talk to you is a very basic one, which I call turning threats into opportunities. And this sounds a lot like an old saw that a lot of us have heard before. You know, when the world gives you lemons, you should make lemonade. But the reality is that threats can be the very core of some of the best innovation out there. And part of the reason why threats are a good source of innovation is because your competitors have a natural disinclination to look at threats and to really seriously consider them as a possibility. Let me give you some examples of people that I've worked with, or some that I haven't worked with, but that all of you should know, that have turned threats into opportunities. One client of mine was in the business of making tax preparation forms, like you would print out your 1040 and things like that on. And one of the threats that they looked at several years ago was the idea that people are going to use software programs and web programs to do their taxes, so that there is a real threat to them of paperless taxes. If people are doing paperless taxes, why would they buy paper from us? The opportunity we came up with out of that was this company went out and acquired a software company and developed a software product that is basically the forms basis for if you want to print out the form, which you generally still have to do for the IRS in some cases. The software to do that actually is a product that my client produces now, and they do it for thousands of different software providers around the world. So they turned that threat into an opportunity, and now that's one of the strongest growing parts of their business. Another good example of a threat, and we're all familiar with, is the threat that people in technology businesses, especially computer manufacturers, faced a few years ago with the convergence between the phone and the computer and actually other electronic devices we use. And the iPhone is a really good sort of natural offshoot of that thought process, where you look at things coming together, and instead of trying to fight it, which Apple certainly might have, and other computer manufacturers have thought about fighting things over the years, they embraced it and created a fabulous product that really not only drove the growth of their business, but also drove some of their computer business forward. A threat I saw in the insurance industry some time ago was somebody I was working with in the southeastern United States was concerned about the threat of hurricanes. They had a lot of low-income customers, people who had insurance with them who, for example, lived in mobile homes. And we started talking about how the fear was that a big hurricane could come in and wipe out a lot of their customers all at once. But when we started to take a look at that, what we realized was that the whole purpose of insurance is to mitigate those real risks that are out there. And when we looked closely at the threat of hurricane, what we realized was nobody else wanted to insure against hurricane damage. And so this company got into the hurricane insurance business, and it ended up being a well in excess of $1 billion product for them, a very, very profitable thing. And it was because they were going after something none of their competitors wanted to do. A threat I see across a lot of different companies, different industries, different sizes is losing a big customer. And one of the most successful responses I've seen to that is instead of focusing on that threat and basically jumping every time the big customer says something and wringing your hands in your strategic planning about what the big customer is going to do, some companies have responded by asking the question, why can't we be happy with small customers? What do we have to do in order to learn how to be profitable and successful with 1,000 small customers instead of 5 big customers? And some of the most successful companies I've worked with, for example, in the capital equipment machinery market, have really embraced this, and it enabled them to branch out away from, say, the big automotive manufacturers into other niches where they could command a substantial premium over what they were getting from the auto companies, and they learned over time not to even care so much what the big customers were doing. If you want to do this, there are a few questions I think you should ask about how to turn a threat into an opportunity. The first thing you want to do is look at the threats. Now, if you're using the simplified strategic planning process that we teach in our seminar, we have an exercise that we do, which is page 4.6, the perceived threats. And I think it's really important to look at those threats, not just those that threaten you in particular, but those that threaten your industry. That is a threat that would be viewed as equally damaging to any of your competitors. And ask the question, why does this threaten us? Why do we feel threatened by this thing? And sometimes it can be a very real threat, especially when you're looking at threats of displacement, such as digital imaging replacing film photography, which damaged Kodak so much. Another question you want to ask is, how do our customers feel about it? So those two questions together can tell you a lot about where the opportunities lie. If we feel threatened because there's some element of, for example, our business model that needs to change, then your strategic question, your strategic opportunities can be in, if we change these pieces of our business model, then this threat, instead of hurting us, can become an opportunity for us and can give us a chance to build much stronger market share because we're dealing with this threat in a different way. When we look at how our customers feel about a threat, the basic question I like to ask there is, are our customers feeling threatened by this, or is it just us? If you take, for example, the threat that Kodak faced of digital imaging, you can clearly see that customers did not feel threatened by replacing film with digital cameras. In fact, once people got over the phobia of digital photography being something that involved computers, they preferred it in most cases to film photography. And so if there is actually a preference, what you want to ask is, how can we lean into that preference? What can we do to help with that preference in a way that doesn't leave us high and dry? So that leads to the next question, what do we need to learn? So for example, the client that was getting into hurricane insurance, they needed to learn how to assess damage to a mobile home, and they also needed to learn how to measure and statistically analyze the risk involved in hurricanes. Like, they knew they were going to have pockets of claims, but they also knew it was very unusual to see major hurricane damage hitting all over the southeast all at once. And that kind of learning is very important. Learning, to me, is one of the most important strategic tools because as it develops, it separates you from your competition. It's very, very difficult for someone to copy learning instantly. Learning is something that takes time, it takes effort, it takes brain power, and so catching up is a much more daunting task for your competitors. The last question is one that I always ask clients to think about. What if we could become the threat? Instead of feeling threatened by this thing, what if, as in the case of the paper tax form company, we could become the company that was driving people to transfer their taxes into a paperless environment? How could we be useful? So those are all good questions to ask. The next tool I want to talk to you about is identifying unmet needs. And again, this is a very simple concept that, that we make money in business by finding a need and then meeting it. But one of the key things to understand here is that there are a lot of unmet needs out there. I like to look at some basic underlying principles that I use when I'm helping people think about how to identify who your target markets are. The first is that customers rarely choose suppliers at random. Whoever you buy from, there's a reason for you to buy from that company, whatever it is, whether it's a service or a product. And also an underlying concept that's very important is that monolithic markets always commoditize. That is, they become more and more price sensitive, and the bigger they are, the more you have to be big in order to deal with the price sensitivity. What I mean by that is that if you are looking at a large identifiable market, there are going to be so many people running at that market that competitively it's very difficult, unless you are innovating, to stay far enough ahead of the game that price does not become an issue to you. Even an innovative company like Apple is definitely aware of price competition eating away at the lower end of its markets. And so you have to understand that if you are not moving the ball forward, if you're just treading water, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to maintain the kind of pricing and margins you enjoy when you first innovate. The third underlying principle that's very important is profit lies in identifying underserved specialty markets. And what I mean by that is you're not looking for the people who are selling silverware or cups and plates or deodorant at Walmart, because those are huge monolithic markets that become commoditized. But what you want to look for is, are there specialty customers that are not being well served by what they can walk into Walmart and pull off the shelf? And in your own business, whether that you're making consumer products or something else, if there's something that cannot be just pulled off the shelf at Walmart, so to speak, or in a metaphorical sense, then there may be potential for an innovation that will focus you in on a market that will compensate you better, and ideally where there's no competition. I'll give you an example of this that's very interesting. I have this summer, I've been eating a gluten-free diet. It means I can't eat meat, or not wheat. I can't eat wheat. And that means, for example, toast and bread and things like that are right off the plate for me in general. But if you go into the supermarket where I shop, there's a company called Udi's that makes bread and bagels and things that don't have wheat in them. And some of them don't taste as good, but some of them taste pretty close. The thing that's amazing to me about that is that in that particular supermarket, they have no competition. And so, a package of bagels that I might expect to spend maybe $2 on, they're charging $8 for those because they're serving this very narrow niche market. So identifying the market and understanding these underlying concepts is very important. Another concept that's really critical for this is to understand that we like to, in the strategy process, bring advantage to the market, bring some advantage that differentiates us ideally to the marketplace, and we use that to create value in the mind of the customer, which is that middle box there. So advantage leads to value, but once value is perceived by customers, it leads to preference, and preference can be expressed through buying more of what we sell or by paying a premium price for what we sell. And when those things happen, when your competitors perceive that preference, it will also draw competition. And that means that innovation is something that you need to do, because that initial advantage, unless you're bringing out a new advantage every month, it's not going to be something you can hang your hat on for 15 years. It's only going to be good for the 2 or 3 years it takes your competitors to figure out what you're doing and copy it. Just just to make things more motivational for you, I'd like to put in a little dramatic photograph with some smug, depressing, smaller text below it to break things up. But now I want to move into the question, why do needs go unmet? If this is the basis for how companies make money, I like to ask the question, well, why don't we all do the right thing here? There are three basic reasons: inertia, fear of business models, and lack of perception. Inertia can come about for a lot of reasons, but in general, I often see it as the first item there, which I call process inertia. And process inertia is where you look at how you do things today, and the inertial response, that is the way things are likely to stay, is we're going to continue to do things tomorrow exactly the way we did things today. People don't like to change how they do things. Inertia can be expressed very, very discreetly in a way that I perceive a lot of the time in strategic planning in different industries through distribution systems. And this is true whether you're talking about people who just sell for you, or it could be, you know, a full-blown distribution system like the people in the grocery market who sell the, you know, they sell bagels and gluten-free bagels and so on. That's a distribution system that has inertia as well. They want to continue to do things the way they do them. And in many industries, the distribution system has more power than the individual suppliers in the market, or even individual customers. The third source of inertia that I see quite often is when you rely too much on experts, especially people who are experts in your industry. Not only are they likely to give you something which I consider to be a poor strategy, which is the same strategy as all your competitors, but they're also likely to tell you that this is the way things are done in our industry. They're likely to tell you what you should be doing by looking in the rearview mirror rather than by looking forward. And there is such a thing as an expert in the future. I know some people who would call themselves futurists, and they do help with this, but they are not industry specialists. In fact, quite often, you know, they go into an industry, and very often they will completely change people's thinking about the industry, and people who use that kind of thinking may end up doing things that are very disruptive. And that's a good thing if you're the disruptor. The second reason why needs go unmet is what I call fear of business models. And you have a business model. Anybody who's in business today and makes money is using a business model, but the business model you're using today is probably very similar to one you used 1, 2, or 5 years ago. And we don't like to change business models because once we tweak it to the point where the business model works, if we start to monkey around with it, it's very easy to break things. Some of the changes can be very subtle, and they can totally break your business model. So we're naturally very afraid of changing our business models. The third reason why needs go unmet is just a lack of perception. Sometimes people aren't even aware of the needs customers have. And this is true whether you're talking about a consumer customer or a B2B customer. We don't know what they want. Part of the reason we don't know what they want is that sometimes our customers don't know what they want. I was talking to someone the other day about the idea that some of the most innovative people out there, they don't just have to sell something that the customer doesn't know they want. They don't even know that they don't know that they want it. And, you know, I think some of the more innovative products we've seen come out of a company like Apple, for example, they've been really good examples of this. Nobody I know was walking around 20 years ago and say, man, I wish I had an iPad. But once you put it in someone's hands, it makes perfect sense. And so the perception suddenly arises after the product's been developed, which is strategically a very difficult situation. So how do we overcome inertia? First of all, I think it's important to find allies in overcoming inertia, and especially if you deal with a strong distribution system or strong customers, you want people within your customers or in the distribution system to be on your side helping you drive forward. I think if you are dealing with a situation where you have competitors who are large and dominate a market, you know, if you're competing against Walmart, you want to find the people who are fighting against that they're shut out of the large companies, or that they don't have the advantages, they don't have the economies of scale. There's something else that they're missing, because those are natural allies in finding ways to nibble around the edges and find the innovations that are going to change the whole industry. The second thing, obviously, is don't rely on experts, or if you do rely on experts, work with experts who bring in a very broad range of knowledge from a lot of different industries. It's not, you don't want to just go to, if you're in the banking business, don't just go to a banking expert. Talk to somebody who has expertise, maybe dealing with retail, for example. And then you may want to change your organization. I've seen companies that have had difficulty overcoming inertia, and they just changed the structure of their organization for no other reason than to unglue people from some of their thinking about the way we do things around here. And that can be quite valuable. The last thing that I like to tell people, and this is in great difficulty convincing someone they need to overcome inertia, is imagine what would happen if your competitors overcame their inertia and did these kind of innovations that were so disruptive to your industry. And usually it's a very frightening prospect. So there are 3 tools I sometimes use in finding unmet needs with my clients, and I often do this either in the perceived opportunities exercise, which in our workbook is page 4.4, or in the strategic issues exercise on page 5.2. I like to ask people, if we had a magic wand, what would we change about our business? If our customers had a magic wand, what would they change? If our suppliers had a magic wand, what would they change? Because that usually will tell you that there are places where the current practice is not the ideal practice for everybody in your business. And whenever you find that disconnect between what people would like in an ideal world and the way things are currently being done, there's a chance to meet a need right there. You might also want to compare to other industries. I use the example of banks comparing themselves with retailers, but I've seen people who run manufacturing firms comparing themselves with the Walt Disney Corporation, or people who run insurance companies comparing themselves with people who run restaurants. There are a lot of different ways you can approach this, and the point is to bring in some imaginative ways to think about your customers having needs that are similar to somebody else's customers. Finally, I think it can be useful to examine the surrounding behaviors, and I'll give you an example of this. One client of mine ran a chain of flooring stores, carpeting and other flooring, and one of the things that they found in their industry that was a surrounding behavior was typically in their market someone would buy carpeting, and then you would have to go out and find an installer to install it, that the company you bought the carpeting from would not do the installation because of workers' compensation costs. And what these guys did that really changed their business and added about 10 points of market share for them almost immediately was they put together, it wasn't a bunch of employees because the workers' comp thing was still an issue, but they put together a mechanism that made it very easy for someone who was in their store to connect with an installer and schedule the carpeting to be installed right away. And so while the installers were independent contractors, the fact that these guys had this great tool, and it was basically a software-based tool to contact and then schedule installation with these people right in the store as opposed to going out and finding it on your own, they were able to greatly improve the feeling of service that they were getting from their customers. The third tool I'd like to talk about is perhaps my favorite tool for a lot of things in strategy, and if you've been to the Simplified Strategic Planning seminar, you've certainly heard a lot about it. That is leveraging strategic competency. And there's a lot of nonsense around the term strategic competency I'm not going to go into, but I want to basically give you a definition. A competency is a combination of skills, process, and knowledge. It's know-how, it's stuff you carry around in your head. A strategic competency is a special type of competency, a special type of know-how that does 2 very distinct things. First of all, it creates significant value for your customers. Not for you, but for your customers. And secondly, it differentiates you from your competition. So companies that have true strategic competencies have a way to create value that is very difficult or impossible for anyone else. And that last item, be difficult to copy, really comes along with differentiation. That, you know, if it's not difficult to copy, it won't differentiate you very long. This concept boils into something I call the island of profit, the island of profitability, which spatially, if you said, boy, I can identify a certain a certain concept, that the closer I get to that concept, the more money I make. The more profitable the customer is, the more likely the customer is to repeat, and the easier it is for me to acquire and retain that customer. And those are all evidence of having what I call an island of profit. And wherever that is, and it doesn't have to be a geographic thing, it could be conceptual. For example, for Walt Disney Company, it's family entertainment. For Honda Motors, it's small engines. And if you understand the concept, so for example, for Honda being small engines, then anything with a small engine in it could be up on top of that island and can have pinnacle profitability. So the idea at Honda then sprouted this concept that there should be a Honda, not just a Honda in every garage, but 4 Hondas in every garage. We should have a small engine in your small car, maybe a motorcycle, maybe a leaf blower, maybe a lawn mower, and so on. All of these could have Honda engines in them. The island of profitability applied at Disney means that because it's family entertainment, anything that revolves around family entertainment is fair game for the Disney franchise. And Disney has gotten into some things that are all over the place, but they make sense because they fit together with people's perception of the brand and Disney's ability to manage family entertainment. So, for example, Disney has TV stuff, obviously, and movies, but they also have a publishing business. They have a cruise line. They have a real estate business. Why? Because those all dovetail with their family entertainment competency. So one tool I like to use for generating competencies is to take things you might think might be competencies and put them on this table where you rate them. And you can rate them in terms of high, medium, and low value, and also uniqueness, high, medium, and low. And anything that's in low value or low uniqueness, that's stuff I would say is not going to be that useful. I have 3 different zones I use for these, and that's what I call the so what zone. It's so what if all of your executives are scuba divers, your customers don't care. So it's high uniqueness, but it's low value. Or so what if every time someone pays you, you actually ship them a product. Your customers expect that. It doesn't differentiate you from anyone, so it's low uniqueness even though it's high value. What you want is a combination of those two and put you up in that upper right-hand corner, which we call the big bucks box. And up in that upper right-hand corner, you are not just creating value, but you're creating value in a way that is difficult or impossible for your competitors. So in terms of thinking about that, one of the things I would suggest to you is if you're not doing strategic planning now, coming up with strategic competency and then leveraging that into innovation is a very important part of the process, because understanding, for example, as Disney did, that family entertainment was their competency, led them to understand that certain innovations they were looking at made sense and others did not. And so there were things Disney pulled the plug on that seemed like a good idea at the time, but after laying it against sort of the template of the strategic competency, it did not make sense. So I've given you 3 tools that come up in strategic planning quite often. I hope you all can use, take a nugget away and use at least one of them. The first, sit down, look at the things that threaten your industries, threaten your business, and threaten your competitors as well, and ask, how can I turn that into an opportunity? How can I become the threat in my industry even better than that? The second is, how can I find needs that are not being met right now? And especially look for the customers who are too small or the customers who seem too unprofitable. And the third is you want to leverage your strategic competencies. Understand what your strategic competency is by going through that process in your strategic planning, and then ask, how can I turn that into opportunities to do new things that I do not do today? With that being said, I'll give you guys a little bit of next steps, but I will ask if there are any questions. I'd love to talk about them. If you want some resources and a generous offer, please visit our website, cssp.com/rbradford. And also, if you're interested, you can attend our Michigan State University Simplified Strategic Planning Seminar, which Denise and I and other people in CSSP are teaching this fall. And you can go to our website. You can also contact me with any questions. My phone number is 734-665-2971, and you can also email me at rbradford@cssp.com. With that being said, our half hour is just about up, but if people have any questions that they'd like to type in for Denise to ask, or if anybody has anything, I'd love it. Tom asked, how can we really uncover unmet needs? One of the things that's really interesting about uncovering unmet needs is that I find, and I was just, actually, Tom, I know you're a speaker. I was talking to a speaker about this last week. I was saying, you've got three different categories. You've got something special that that you have, and if the customer knows that that's what they want, it's really easy to sell. That's type 1, very easy sale. I'm a sales trainer. If somebody wants sales training, they're going to hire you right off the bat. The second type is what you have is really what they're looking for, but they don't know that they're looking for it. And that's a situation where a good sales process, a consultative selling process, can help you to reach the point where the customer or prospective client can understand that what you are selling is going to meet the need that they have. But it's really important, I think, if you want to meet unmet needs, you've got to spend some time talking to customers about what their needs are and understand that you're not going to meet every single need. Ask yourself the question, where are we seeing needs that other people are not meeting? The third category is the hardest, which is where the customer has a need, but they don't, not only do they not know that they have a need, and they don't know that you could meet that need, and maybe you don't know until after you've worked with them you could meet that need. And that's probably the most difficult. And that's where you get those people who say, wow, afterwards, but before they've bought from you, you have trouble, even sometimes maybe even convincing yourself that what you're going to do is going to be right for them. And in those situations, the best thing I can say is you need to have a lot of at-bats. And by at-bats, I mean not just ability, opportunities to propose to clients who think they want what you're selling, but also opportunities to just go in and work with people whose only reason for bringing you in is that somehow you stimulated them, you made them think, and they like the way you think, and they want to get some more of that in their organization. And that's, that's for you as, you do speaking, but if I look at people with products, it's basically a situation where you want a situation where early adopters can try what you're bringing to the market and then give you feedback on it and say, yes, it does meet my need, or, oh my gosh, I found I can use it for this or that. I can use it to, keep track of recipes in my kitchen, or I can use it to, I was thinking about last week, a new use I have for my iPhone is I take photographs of the receipts. Instead of keeping the paper, I just have a photograph of the receipt. And that's a need that I didn't even realize I had until I had the product in my hands. And I think until you get your product into the hands of really creative customers, it's hard to get that last one. Is there another question?
Yes. Before we get to a couple more questions, I wanted to mention to everybody we have recorded this session, and it will be up on our website. So if you want to listen to Robert again, or were pulled away from your desk, that will give you a chance to re-listen to this. So another question was, how do we find our strategic competency? We talk about it a lot, but we really don't unearth what differentiates us. Do you have any further thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. I think, first of all, that finding strategic competency is one of the central and most impactful parts of the strategic planning process. And a good strategic planning process will break all of the pieces apart and put them out as data and ideas so that you can look at them and evaluate them, and then put them all back together in a way that helps you recognize your strategic competency. That being said, it can be something that it takes a little time, and it takes some time even to describe how to do it. I would suggest, if you're wondering how to do this and you haven't done so already, you should definitely come to the Michigan State University seminar. We spend a couple of hours talking about how to do that. But if you'd like to talk to me about it offline, I'd be happy to do that as well.
Excellent. One of our listeners said that a threat to a customer as compared to a threat to a consumer. So digital photography hurt retailers but helped consumers. But a question that it's a really powerful concept, turning threats into opportunities. Was there anything else you could give us some hints on how to really look at that as we develop a strategic plan?
Well, that's a really interesting comment, that it's a threat to retailers, but it helped, and that's our customer, but it helped consumers. Because ultimately, and this is true no matter what business you're in, what you do had better ultimately be good for some consumer somewhere. And if it's not, it's probably barking up the wrong tree in the long run. And what I mean by that is, let's use the digital photography example. You could come up with something that wasn't digital photography that was high-tech and made the retailers and the people who sold development services and sold film happy, but because it did not serve the need of the consumer, it would not have the powerful pull. And I have seen a lot of situations where companies have used the distribution channel, retailers, distributors, middlemen of some sort or another, as sort of a substitute for true innovation by just appealing to the retailer and not to the end customer. And that can delay the demise of whatever business model you're currently using, but it cannot prevent the demise of that business model. And that's exactly what happened to Kodak. They delayed, but they did not prevent the demise of film-based photography.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Robert. This has been an excellent session.